In a world where kindness is often overlooked, one man's simple decision changes the course of a woman and child's life forever. Marcus never expected a routine day at work would lead him to something far greater than his job. What happens when a garbage collector becomes an unlikely hero? Marcus's day takes a dramatic turn when he encounters Rachel, a woman struggling with more than just a bruised face. As the day unfolds, Marcus finds himself in the middle of a whirlwind, facing unexpected dangers, confronting threats, and even finding a new purpose. A simple act of kindness becomes the catalyst for a series of life-changing events, leading Marcus to question everything he thought he knew about duty, humanity, and community. But the real question is, can a man with the purest heart survive the storm that follows, or will he lose everything in the process? Don't miss the story that will make you rethink what it means to truly serve. Before we journey further into this unforgettable story, make sure you're subscribed to Epic Story Moments. Hit that bell icon now so you never miss an incredible tale. Join our community by liking, sharing, and commenting to keep these heartwarming stories coming. And hey, tell us where you're watching from. We love connecting with you all. The morning air was crisp as Marcus Taylor steered his garbage truck into the heart of Brightwood, a quiet suburban neighborhood where every home looked like a postcard. The sun cast soft shadows over the neatly trimmed lawns, and the stillness was broken only by the hum of Marcus's truck and the occasional chirp of birds. Normally, he would feel a sense of calm starting his route here, but today was different. The clock on his dashboard read 8:20 a.m., and he was running nearly 35 minutes late. His partner had called in sick, leaving Marcus to handle the route alone. Though frustrated, Marcus was a professional. For 2 years, he had taken pride in his work, knowing that his early mornings and diligent efforts kept the community clean. As he turned down one of the quieter streets, he noticed Rachel Harper and her young daughter, Lucy, stepping out of their car. Their house was familiar to him, as was their warm, friendly demeanor. However, something felt off today. Marcus rolled down his window, offering his customary, "Good morning." Rachel responded with a curt nod, her voice tight as she muttered, "Morning." Lucy, usually a bright, bubbly child, kept her head down, avoiding his gaze entirely. Marcus frowned, a slight unease creeping into his thoughts. Shrugging it off, he moved to empty their trash bin. As he hoisted it towards the truck, something caught his eye. A loosely tied bag shifted, revealing its contents. Brand new children's clothes, tags still attached, alongside a pristine school backpack, and used supplies and unopened toys. The sight gave Marcus pause. He stood there for a moment, wrestling with his instincts. As a rule, he never questioned what residents threw away. It wasn't his business. But this, it felt wrong. His mind flickered to the children in his neighborhood, who could only dream of having such items. Why would anyone discard something so valuable? The weight of the bin suddenly felt heavier, not from its physical load, but from the questions it carried. Deciding he couldn't simply toss the items into the compactor, Marcus pulled the bag out and placed it aside. After a brief moment of hesitation, he made his way to the Harper's front door, the bag in hand. He knocked gently at first, then more firmly when there was no response. Finally, after ringing the doorbell twice, Rachel opened the door. Marcus took a step back, startled by her appearance. She looked disheveled, her hair in disarray and dark circles under her eyes. The confident, composed woman he was accustomed to seeing was nowhere in sight. "Mrs. Harper," he began cautiously, his voice steady but apologetic. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but I noticed these items in your trash." He held up the bag, its contents partially visible. "I thought you might not be aware of the donation centers in our area. These things could really help someone in need." Rachel's reaction was immediate and sharp. Her eyes narrowed, and her voice carried an edge he hadn't expected. "It was no mistake," she snapped. "What I throw away is none of your business." Marcus blinked, caught off guard by her hostility. "I didn't mean to overstep," he tried to explain. I just thought. Rachel cut him off with a wave of her hand. If you want them so badly, take them. Just leave. Her tone was biting, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play. Reluctantly, he nodded and stepped back, placing the bag by his truck. He glanced at Lucy, who was peeking out from behind her mother, her eyes wide with something that looked like fear. The look sent a shiver down his spine. As Marcus returned to his truck, he couldn't stop the questions racing through his mind. What was going on in that house? Why had Rachel reacted so strongly? And why did Lucy look so frightened? Something about the entire encounter didn't sit right, and Marcus knew he couldn't just ignore it. His instincts screamed that there was more to the story. A truth buried beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. Little did he know, that truth would soon come crashing into his ordinary morning, unraveling a mystery far darker than he could have ever imagined. As the morning sun cast its gentle glow over the quiet suburban streets, Marcus Taylor guided his garbage truck with practiced precision. The rhythmic hum of the truck's engine accompanied his thoughts, a melody that had become second nature after 2 years of navigating these neighborhoods. But today, something was different, something that would transform his ordinary day into a tale of courage and humanity. Marcus had just emptied another bin when he noticed a small figure darting out from between 2 parked cars. His heart skipped a beat as a little girl, no older than 7, clung to his leg. She was trembling, her tear-streaked face etched with desperation. "Please help," she whispered, her voice cracking as she pointed toward a house down the street. Marcus crouched down, his rough hands now gentle, as he tried to soothe the child. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Are you hurt? Where's your mom?" The girl, Lucy, could only sob, her words fragmented and filled with fear. "Dad, Mom's scared," she managed to say between hiccups. Marcus felt an icy chill run down his spine. He recalled the uneasy interaction he'd had with Lucy's mother, Rachel, earlier that morning. Her disheveled appearance, the rushed, intense greeting, and now this frightened child. It all painted a picture that left him deeply unsettled. Determined to uncover what was happening, Marcus guided Lucy back toward her house. Her resistance was palpable, her small hands clutching his arm as if seeking protection from an unseen threat. Just as they neared the driveway, the sound of a door slamming made Marcus turn his head sharply. A man emerged, his stride purposeful and his gaze locked on Lucy. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a custom-tailored suit that screamed wealth and power. Yet, his face was a mask of barely contained fury. "What are you doing with my daughter?" the man demanded, his voice sharp and commanding. Marcus instinctively stepped in front of Lucy, shielding her from the approaching figure. "She came to me for help," he replied evenly, keeping his tone calm. "She seemed scared. I just want to make sure she's okay." The man's eyes narrowed as he sized up Marcus, his gaze flickering briefly over the garbage collector's uniform. His lips curled into a sneer. "Help? Someone like you? What could you possibly do to help?" Each word dripped with condescension, and Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He had faced prejudice before, but the sheer disdain in the man's voice was cutting. Still, Marcus stood firm, his protective instincts overriding any fear or anger he felt. "Look," Marcus began, his voice steady but firm, "I don't know what's going on, but your daughter is clearly upset. If something's wrong, maybe I can—" "You can mind your business," the man interrupted, stepping closer. His tone grew darker, his voice laced with barely restrained hostility. "This is my family. You don't get to interfere. Know your place, garbage man." Marcus clenched his fists, his heart pounding. He wanted to lash out, to defend himself against the man's venomous words, but Lucy's trembling form kept him grounded. This wasn't about his pride or ego. It was about a little girl who needed help. Lucy suddenly broke free from Marcus and ran toward the house, her sobs echoing in the still morning air. Marcus hesitated, torn between following her and confronting the man who now glared at him with barely disguised contempt. Before Marcus could decide his next move, The sound of shattering glass echoed from within the house. Both men froze, their eyes darting toward the source of the noise. Lucy's terrified scream followed, piercing through the silence like a knife. "Lucy!" Marcus shouted, his feet already moving toward the house. But the man stepped in his way, blocking the path. "This is none of your concern," he said coldly, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting inside. Marcus didn't back down. "That little girl came to me for help. Something is wrong in there, and I won't stand by and do nothing." The man's composure cracked, his face contorting with anger. But before he could respond, the front door burst open and Rachel stumbled out. Her face was pale, her hands shaking as she clutched a phone. "I've called the police," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "This ends now." The man's expression shifted from anger to shock, and he turned toward her, his confident facade crumbling. "Rachel, you don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing." She cut him off, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Lucy and I won't live in fear anymore." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as police cars approached. Marcus stepped back, letting the authorities take over. He watched as the man was apprehended, his protest drowned out by the chaos. Lucy ran to her mother, who knelt down and enveloped her in a protective embrace. Tears streamed down both their faces, but there was relief in their eyes, a glimmer of hope that hadn't been there before. As the police began their investigation, Marcus quietly returned to his truck. The bag of discarded items still sat in the cab, a poignant reminder of the morning's events. He glanced at Rachel and Lucy one last time, their figures framed by the flashing lights of the police cars. This ordinary morning had become anything but, and Marcus knew he'd done the right thing. Sometimes, being a hero didn't require a cape, just the courage to stand up when it mattered most. With a deep breath, Marcus started the truck and continued his route, the weight in his chest lighter than before. As Marcus pulled up to the house on his usual route, the morning seemed like any other. The rhythmic hum of the garbage truck engine blended with the chirping of birds. But as he stepped out to lift the bin, an inexplicable unease settled over him. Something about the home felt off, a pristine facade with an almost eerie stillness. Just as Marcus was about to return to his truck, the door creaked open and a woman stepped out. Her appearance startled him. Rachel, as her name tag read, looked disheveled, her face pale and etched with stress. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. It wasn't just fatigue he saw. There was fear behind her eyes. Before Marcus could respond, a loud crash shattered the tense silence. The sound of breaking glass echoed from within the house. Marcus and Rachel flinched simultaneously. Rachel's eyes widened in panic, and without another word, she slammed the door shut. Marcus stood there, frozen in place. His instincts told him something was wrong, terribly wrong. But what could he do? He debated calling the authorities, but hesitated, uncertain of what he had just witnessed. Finally, he returned to his truck, placing the rescued items from the trash carefully in the cab rather than discarding them. As he drove off, he couldn't shake the image of Rachel's frightened face or the crash that followed. The morning that began as ordinary had now spiraled into something unsettling. 5 houses down, Marcus resumed his routine, trying to focus on the task at hand. Yet the sense of unease lingered. The barking of a neighbor's dog snapped him back to the present as he lifted another bin. Suddenly, a small figure darted from between 2 parked cars. "Whoa!" Marcus exclaimed, nearly dropping the trash bin. A little girl, no older than 6, latched onto his leg. Her tear-streaked face and trembling form struck him. She was dressed in a clean blue floral dress, as if prepared for a special outing. But her terrified expression told a different story. "Please help," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "He's going to hurt Mommy again." Marcus crouched down to meet her gaze. "Hey there, sweetie. It's okay. Can you tell me your name?" "Lucy," she said, her small voice barely audible. She pointed to the house she'd come from, her hand trembling. "Is your mom inside?" Marcus asked gently, but Lucy clung to him tighter, refusing to let go. Before Marcus could comfort her further, the door to the house slammed open. A tall man in an expensive suit stormed out, his face a mask of fury. His commanding voice boomed across the yard. "What are you doing with my daughter?" Lucy's grip on Marcus tightened as she whimpered. Marcus straightened, positioning himself between the man and the frightened child. "Sir, your daughter approached me. She's upset. I'm just trying to help." The man's expression shifted from anger to disdain as he took in Marcus's uniform. "Help? Someone like you? Stay out of my business, garbage man. Know your place." The venom in his words was unmistakable. Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but forced himself to remain calm. The situation was volatile, and escalating it could put Lucy in more danger. "Sir," Marcus said evenly, "your daughter is scared. You think, the man interrupted, sneering. "Don't flatter yourself. You're a nobody. I'll have you fired for this, or better yet, arrested." Lucy clung to Marcus, her small frame trembling against him. "Please," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Don't make me go back." Marcus's heart broke at her plea. But before he could respond, the man lunged forward, grabbing Lucy's arm. "You're coming with me," he snarled. "No," Lucy screamed, pulling free and running back to Marcus. "I'd rather die than go with him." The man froze, his expression briefly betraying shock. Marcus felt a chill run through him. This wasn't just a scared child. This was a cry for help. "Sir," Marcus said, his voice firm, "if you don't back off, I'll have no choice but to call child services." The man's face paled at the mention of authorities. His bluster faltered, and he took a step back, muttering curses under his breath. But as he retreated, he pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. Moments later, the front door burst open again. This time, the man dragged Rachel into view. Her face was bruised and swollen, one eye nearly shut. She couldn't speak, but her pleading gaze met Marcus's. "Get back in the house," the man barked, shoving Rachel toward the car. Marcus's instincts took over. "Let her go," he shouted, stepping forward. The man turned to face him, his expression a mix of rage and desperation. But before he could respond, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Marcus had discreetly activated an emergency call on his phone. When the police arrived, the situation unfolded rapidly. Lucy clung to Marcus as officers intervened, detaining the man and ensuring Rachel received medical attention. As Rachel was placed in an ambulance, she managed a weak smile. "Thank you," she whispered to Marcus. Lucy hugged him tightly, her small arms conveying more gratitude than words ever could. That night, as Marcus returned home, he reflected on the events of the day. He had gone from a routine garbage collection to becoming an unexpected hero. And though he knew his actions might cause trouble at work, he couldn't regret them. He had made a difference, and that was all that mattered. Marcus felt his chest tighten as he stood in the aftermath of the chaotic scene. Lucy's small hand clung to his, her eyes filled with silent pleas. The house before them, now eerily quiet, bore the scars of recent violence. A shattered home both figuratively and literally. Broken glass glinted under the morning sun, and the scattered belongings hinted at a family desperate to escape an inescapable terror. Taking a deep breath, Marcus crouched down to Lucy's level. "Lucy," he began softly, "I want to help you, but I need to call the police. Is that okay?" Lucy hesitated for a moment, then gave a small nod, her lips trembling as tears welled up in her wide, frightened eyes. Marcus fished his phone from his pocket and dialed 911. As the line connected, he forced his voice to remain calm, steady. Years of managing his emotions while on his route had prepared him for moments of tension. But this was unlike anything he'd ever faced. 911, what's your emergency?" the operator asked. Marcus relayed the events in precise detail. The aggression he had witnessed, Rachel's injuries, and the father's reckless escape with her. He described the scene around him, emphasizing the danger to the child beside him. The operator assured him help was on the way. As Marcus ended the call, he turned to Lucy, who remained glued to his side. "The police are coming. They'll help find your mom." Moments later, the wail of sirens pierced the suburban stillness. Patrol cars arrived in a coordinated rush, their flashing lights cutting through the tension. Officers quickly secured the area, assessing the damage as Marcus stayed outside with Lucy, a female officer, her graying hair pulled back neatly, approached them. She crouched down to Lucy's level, her kind eyes meeting the girls. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm Officer Sarah. Can you tell me what happened?" Lucy hesitated, her small hands balled into fists at her sides. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Dad took Mom," she said, her words trembling. "He hurt her really bad. I'm scared I'll never see her again." Officer Sarah's expression turned serious as she nodded gently. "Thank you for telling me, Lucy. That's very brave." Marcus quickly filled in the gaps, describing the father's volatile behavior, Rachel's visible injuries, and his own observations of the house. Sarah listened intently, her demeanor calm but resolute. "We'll do everything we can to find your mom," she promised Lucy. Turning to Marcus, she added, "Do you remember anything about the car or the man's appearance?" Marcus thought for a moment. It was a dark blue sedan, an older model. The front bumper was dented on the left side. The guy was about 6 feet tall, medium build, wearing a black suit. He had short, sleek hair and a beard. The officer nodded, quickly relaying the details to her team. Other officers emerged from the house, their faces grim, as they assessed the scene. Lucy's trembling voice interrupted the silence. "He might hurt Grandma," she blurted out, her eyes wide with sudden panic. "She lives a few blocks away. What if he goes there?" The urgency in her voice spurred immediate action. Officer Sarah relayed the information to her colleagues, who swiftly split their forces, some remaining to secure the house while others prepared to check on the grandmother. "Lucy," the senior officer said gently, "we need you to come with us to your grandma's house. Can you show us where it is?" Lucy hesitated, glancing up at Marcus. She clung tighter to his hand, her trust in him evident. Sensing her distress, Marcus made a decision. "I'll follow in my truck," he said. "I need to see this through." The officers exchanged glances, but ultimately agreed. Reassured by Marcus's promise, Lucy finally agreed to ride in the patrol car. As she climbed into the back seat, Marcus hurried to his garbage truck. He knew he was far behind on his route, and that his actions today would have consequences. But none of that mattered. His purpose now was clear: to ensure Lucy's safety and find Rachel. The convoy of police vehicles, with Marcus's garbage truck trailing behind, moved swiftly through the neighborhood. Each turn brought them closer to the grandmother's house, and potentially closer to danger. As they rounded the corner into the grandmother's cul-de-sac, a scene of chaos unfolded before them. The father's car was parked haphazardly in the driveway, the engine still running. The front door of the modest home stood ajar, and inside, raised voices and muffled cries could be heard. Marcus's grip tightened on the steering wheel. This was it. Everything had led to this moment. He parked his truck and jumped out, ready to do whatever it took to protect Lucy and her family. Police officers moved in quickly, their training evident as they approached the house with caution. Marcus stayed back with Lucy, shielding her from the unfolding confrontation. From the safety of his arms, Lucy whispered, "That's my grandma's house. Please, don't let him hurt her too." Her words ignited a fire in Marcus's heart. No matter what, he wouldn't let her down. The father's car was carelessly parked in the driveway, its front tire up on the grass, the rear wheels barely clinging to the asphalt. Standing on the porch, he looked every bit the furious, disheveled man he had become. His expensive suit, once crisp and pristine, now hung in wrinkled defeat. His face twisted in anger, red with fury. His eyes narrowed as he shouted to the house. "Open the door!" he screamed, his voice booming to the quiet neighborhood, his rage infectious. "I know you have the passports. Hand them over right now, or I swear I'll break this door down." From a distance, Marcus could see Rachel, still trapped inside the car. Her condition was worse than before. Her head drooped against the window, her body slack. The bruising on her face was unmistakable, even from where Marcus stood. The scene had drawn a crowd of curious neighbors who had either stepped outside or peered through their curtains, trying to make sense of the unfolding drama. Some whispered among themselves. Others discreetly recorded the events on their phones, unable to look away from the disturbing spectacle. The father, noticing the growing audience, turned his anger on them. "Mind your own business," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. In a fit of rage, he grabbed a small decorative rock from the garden and hurled it toward the onlookers, sending them scattering in fear. Then, the sound of approaching police sirens pierced the air, and the father's attitude shifted from aggressive to frantic. His eyes widened with panic as he turned back to his car, clearly ready to flee, leaving Rachel behind. Marcus acted on instinct. He floored the accelerator of his garbage truck, quickly maneuvering the massive vehicle to block the driveway, trapping the father's car between his truck and the now arriving police cars. Tires screeched as the police vehicles skidded into position, officers pouring out with weapons drawn. "Step out of the vehicle, hands up," an officer commanded through a megaphone. For a brief moment, it seemed like the father might try to ram his way out, but the sight of armed officers closing in with guns aimed at him drained his courage. Slowly, he opened the car door and stepped out, raising his hands in surrender as the police moved in to apprehend him. His gaze locked onto Marcus, who had exited his truck and was watching the scene unfold. "You!" the father spat, his face contorted with hatred. "This is all your fault. You nosy piece of trash. I swear I'll ruin you for this. You'll never work in this town again." The officers quickly intervened, pulling the enraged man away from Marcus, protecting him from the verbal assault. But Marcus couldn't ignore the chilling weight of the threats. Though his actions had been morally right, he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment could have serious repercussions for his career, and perhaps even his safety. Just then, Lucy, a small girl with wide, fearful eyes, emerged from the back of a police car. Her face was a mixture of relief and terror, her gaze searching frantically for her mother. The moment she saw Rachel still slumped in the car, Lucy broke free from the officer, holding her hand, and ran toward the vehicle. Mommy, are you okay?" she cried out. Rachel stirred weakly at the sound of her daughter's voice, but couldn't respond. She was too exhausted, too broken. An officer quickly pulled Lucy back, gently explaining that paramedics would soon assist her mother. As Lucy was led away, the father's demeanor shifted dramatically. The angry, threatening figure from moments ago crumpled before the eyes of everyone. Falling to his knees on the lawn, tears streamed down his face as he cried out for his daughter. "Lucy, baby, please. Daddy loves you. This is all just a big misunderstanding." Marcus felt a wave of conflicting emotions wash over him. Part of him wanted to believe the sincerity in the father's tears, to hope that beneath all the violence and rage, there was still a loving parent. But the vivid image of Rachel's bruised face and the terror on Lucy's small face burned in his mind. He reminded himself that abusers often used emotional manipulation as a tactic to regain control. The police were equally conflicted. Their faces were a mix of skepticism and caution, unsure of the father's true motives. But their professional duty remained clear. Despite his pleas and his tears, they continued to secure him in handcuffs, not letting his emotional outburst derail their work. Meanwhile, other officers had retrieved the keys from the father's reluctant hands and were finally freeing Rachel from the car. Marcus, with Lucy clinging tightly to his hand, helped escort Rachel to the porch, where an older woman, no doubt Lucy's grandmother, stood anxiously in the doorway, her face, initially carved with worry, softened with relief as she saw Rachel and Lucy safe. "Oh, thank God," she breathed, rushing forward to embrace them. She guided them to a seating area on the porch, where Rachel collapsed into a nearby chair, physically drained from the ordeal. The grandmother quickly fetched a glass of water and ice wrapped in a towel to help soothe Rachel's swollen face. Lucy stayed close, her small hand resting protectively on her mother's arm, as if ensuring she was really there and safe. Marcus stood nearby, feeling both relief and uncertainty. The immediate danger had passed, but he couldn't help but wonder what would come next. As Rachel drank the water, slowly regaining some color in her face, Marcus was overcome with a whirlwind of emotions. He was relieved that Rachel and Lucy were safe. He was angry at the abuse they had suffered, and yet a gnawing worry lingered. What would be the consequences of his actions today? Would his involvement in this volatile situation come back to haunt him? The atmosphere on the porch was thick with unspoken truths. Rachel, now more alert after drinking the water, sat on the rattan chair with Lucy curled up beside her. Marcus remained on the periphery, feeling like both an outsider and a crucial part of this family's moment of healing. An officer, a calm and kind-looking man, approached. He introduced himself as Officer Johnson. His gentle eyes and measured tone were in sharp contrast to the violence they had just witnessed. "Mrs. Harper," he began, his voice both soft and professional, "I know this is difficult, but we need to fully understand what happened. Can you tell us about your relationship with your husband?" Rachel took a deep breath, wincing slightly at the pain from her bruised ribs. As her strength returned, she began to unravel the tragic story of her marriage. "We've been married for 8 years, she started, her voice barely a whisper at first. "In the beginning, everything was perfect. Dennis was charming, successful. He seemed like the ideal husband and father." She paused, absent-mindedly stroking Lucy's hair, as she gathered the strength to continue. But things changed. His success in business coincided with his descent into addiction. The pressure of running everything led him to drink heavily. And that's when everything fell apart. Rachel's voice grew steadier as she spoke, as if unburdening herself of years of pain. "It started with verbal abuse, put-downs, controlling behavior, isolating me from my friends and family. Then came the physical intimidation, throwing things, punching walls. I kept making excuses, believing that he'd change. But Lucy, she saw it all, and I couldn't protect her from any of it. The father's car was parked haphazardly in the driveway, one wheel half on the lawn, a chaotic symbol of his fury. On the porch stood the father, his expensive suit now wrinkled and disheveled, his face twisted in anger. His voice boomed across the neighborhood as he shouted, "Open the door. I know you have the passports. Give them to me now, or I swear I'll break this door down." Rachel was trapped inside the car, her condition more fragile than before. Her head hung against the window, her face swollen with bruising. Even from a distance, the signs of her suffering were unmistakable. The loud commotion had drawn the attention of curious neighbors, many of whom had emerged from their homes. Some whispered to each other, while others peeked from behind curtains, and a few bold individuals had even taken out their phones to record the scene. The father, noticing the growing crowd, turned his rage on them. "Mind your own business," he snarled, grabbing a small decorative rock from the garden. He hurled it at the onlookers, sending them scattering in fear. Just as the chaos reached its peak, the wail of police sirens sliced through the air. In an instant, the father's demeanor shifted from aggression to panic. He rushed back to his car, seemingly intending to flee with Rachel still inside. Marcus, thinking quickly, made a split-second decision. He slammed the accelerator in his garbage truck, maneuvering the massive vehicle to block the driveway. The truck wedged between the father's car and the approaching police vehicles, trapping the father in place. The screech of tires echoed as police cars swarmed the house, officers pouring out with weapons drawn. "Step out of the vehicle with your hands up," an officer commanded through a megaphone. For a tense moment, It seemed the father might try to ram his way out, but the sight of multiple officers with guns trained on him deflated his bravado. Slowly, he opened the car door and stepped out, his hands raised in surrender. The officers moved in swiftly to apprehend him. His eyes landed on Marcus, who had stepped out of his truck. "You!" The father spat, his face contorted with hatred. "This is all your fault. You nosy piece of trash. I'll ruin you for this. You'll never work in this town again." The officers quickly restrained the raging man, shielding Marcus from his verbal assault. But Marcus couldn't ignore the chill creeping down his spine as the father's threats lingered in the air. He knew that while his actions today had been the morally right choice, they could come with dire consequences for his career. Just then, Lucy emerged from the police car. Her small face, a mixture of relief and fear, scanned the scene. When she spotted her mother still trapped in the car, she broke free from the officer holding her hand and dashed toward the vehicle, pounding on the window. Mommy, are you okay?" Rachel stirred weakly at the sound of her daughter's voice, but was too exhausted to respond. An officer gently pulled Lucy away, explaining that paramedics would help her mother soon. As Lucy was led back from the car, the father's demeanor shifted once more. The aggressive, threatening man who had moments ago raged against the world now crumbled to the ground, falling to his knees on the lawn. Tears streamed down his face as he called out, "Lucy, baby, please. Daddy loves you. This is all a big misunderstanding." Marcus felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Part of him wanted to believe that the man's tears were real, to believe that somewhere beneath the violence and rage, there was a father who truly cared for his daughter. But the images of Rachel's battered face and Lucy's terror were burned into his memory. He reminded himself that abusers often use emotional manipulation to regain control. The police, too, seemed torn. Their faces were a mixture of skepticism and professionalism as they processed the now weeping man, securing him in handcuffs despite his desperate pleas. Meanwhile, other officers retrieved the car keys from the father and finally freed Rachel from the vehicle. Marcus, with Lucy at his side, moved to help Rachel to the porch. The little girl clung to Marcus's hand, her eyes never leaving her mother's face as they reached the porch. The front door swung open to reveal an older woman, clearly Lucy's grandmother. Her face, etched with worry and fear, softened with relief as she rushed forward to embrace Rachel. "Oh, thank God," the grandmother breathed, her arms enveloping Rachel as she guided them to a seat on the porch. Rachel collapsed into the chair, her body exhausted from the ordeal. The grandmother quickly fetched a glass of water and some ice wrapped in a towel for Rachel's swollen face. Lucy remained close, her small hand resting protectively on Rachel's arm, as if reassuring herself that her mother was really safe. Marcus stood nearby, a mixture of relief and unease settling in him. While the immediate danger had passed, he couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. As Rachel sipped the water, color slowly returning to her face, Marcus couldn't help but feel a heavy mix of emotions. There was relief that Rachel and Lucy were safe, anger at the abuse they had suffered, and a growing sense of worry about the personal consequences he might face for his involvement. The atmosphere on the porch grew heavy with unspoken truths. Rachel, now more alert, sat upright in the outdoor rattan chair with Lucy curled protectively at her side. Marcus stood a short distance away, feeling like an intruder in this intimate family moment, yet still an essential part of it. An officer approached the porch to take Rachel's statement, introducing himself as Officer Johnson. His kind eyes and calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the violence they had all just witnessed. "Mrs. Harper," he began softly, yet professionally, "I know this is difficult, but we need to fully understand what happened. Can you tell us about your relationship with your husband?" Rachel took a deep breath, wincing slightly at the pain in her bruised ribs. Her strength had returned enough to speak, and as she did, she began to unravel the tragedy that had been unfolding for years. "We've been married for 8 years," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. At first, everything was perfect. Dennis was charming, successful, the ideal husband and father. She paused, absent-mindedly stroking Lucy's hair as the weight of the memories pressed down on her. But things changed, she continued, her voice growing stronger as if the act of revealing the truth gave her strength. His success in business led to addiction. The stress of running his business empire pushed him into drinking heavily. Her eyes filled with tears as she spoke of the emotional and physical abuse that followed. It started with verbal abuse, then controlling behavior. He isolated me from my friends and family. The intimidation escalated, throwing things, punching walls. I kept making excuses, thinking he would change. Lucy sniffled quietly beside her, her small face reflecting the heart-wrenching truth in her mother's words. The final straw came 3 years ago, Rachel said, her voice breaking. Lucy witnessed one of his violent outbursts. I knew then that I had to leave, for her sake if not for my own. We got divorced, but Dennis, he couldn't accept it. Officer Johnson nodded, jotting down notes. And since the divorce, Rachel's face grew tense. He couldn't accept the separation. He shows up unannounced, asserting control over me and Lucy. I got a restraining order, but as you can see, she gestured to her battered face, you can see how much that mattered to him. He believes his wealth and influence can shield him from the consequences. The officer's face hardened. No one is above the law, Mrs. Harper. We'll make sure he faces justice. Rachel nodded, taking a shaky breath before continuing. Last week, Dennis begged for one last chance. He said he'd visited a psychiatrist and wanted a family holiday to fix things. But when he showed up this morning, he was already half drunk, smelling of alcohol. I knew nothing had changed. Rachel paused again, her hand trembling slightly as she set down her glass. While he was asleep, I took Lucy's and my passports to my mother's house. When Dennis woke up, he was furious. He demanded we go on the trip overseas. I refused. He became violent. That's when I knew we were in danger. Her voice broke as she recalled his chilling words. He said he would take Lucy, that the passports didn't matter, that his connections could make her disappear. Thanks to Marcus, Rachel whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. He stopped him. Officer Johnson's expression was one of controlled anger as he processed the gravity of Rachel's words. Thank you, Mrs. Harper. Your bravery will help us build a strong case against your ex-husband. But just then, Dennis's voice could be heard from the street, loud and insistent. This is all a misunderstanding. What she's saying isn't true. The officer excused himself and stepped off the porch to confront Dennis. As Marcus watched, the father, still in handcuffs and guarded by officers, seemed to regain his swagger. His voice carried across the air. Yes, we're divorced, but I never beat her. I just wanted a family trip. Rachel's the one who had the passports and threw away my gifts. She just doesn't want to see me bond with Lucy. Rachel's face went pale at his words, but she remained silent. Marcus, feeling a surge of anger, stepped forward. Sir, if I may, he said, addressing the officer, I can provide witness testimony. I saw Mr. Harper's racist behavior toward me, and I saw Lucy's fear of him. The officer turned to him. Your testimony could be crucial, Mr. Taylor. We'll need you to come to the station to give a formal statement. Before Marcus could respond, another officer arrived on the porch. We've conducted a breathalyzer test on Mr. Harper. He's well over the legal limit. Good, said Officer Johnson, his voice grim. That settles it. We're taking him in on multiple charges. Driving under the influence, domestic abuse, violating a restraining order, and attempted kidnapping. As the officers made their final preparations, the detective turned to Rachel. Mrs. Harper, we'll need you and Lucy to come down to the station to give your statements. Is there someone who can accompany you? Rachel's mother stepped forward. I'll go with them, she said, her voice firm with determination. The detective nodded and then turned to Marcus. Mr. Taylor, We appreciate your involvement in this case. Your actions today likely saved 2 lives. However, I understand you were on duty. You may want to contact your company." Marcus nodded, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "Yes, sir. I should probably explain the situation." As the group prepared to leave for the police station, Marcus's mind was swirling with conflicting emotions. There was relief that Rachel and Lucy were safe, pride in knowing he had done the right thing, but also anxiety about what it would mean for his job. Still, as he followed the police cars and his garbage truck, Marcus knew one thing for sure. He would make the same choice again in a heartbeat. At the police station, activity buzzed around them as Dennis's arrest was processed and statements were taken. Marcus stood apart, still feeling somewhat out of place in his work uniform. The sterile, fluorescent-lit hallways of the station felt worlds away from the quiet suburban streets where his day had begun. Rachel sat in a chair, holding an ice pack to her bruised face. Lucy curled up beside her as her grandmother hovered nearby, offering comfort with each worried glance. Marcus stood at a distance, still processing the enormity of what had just happened. Rachel caught his eye and motioned for him to come closer. Her voice was soft, filled with gratitude. "Marcus, I don't even know how to thank you. You put yourself at risk for us, and you probably jeopardized your job. I'm so sorry for involving you." Marcus shook his head, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. "Please, don't apologize. I'm just glad you and Lucy are safe now." Rachel's grip on Marcus's hand tightened as the weight of the past few hours began to settle on her. "You really didn't have to get involved," she said, her voice trembling with gratitude. "Most people wouldn't have." Marcus smiled, his eyes softening as he met her gaze. "I've been taking your trash for 2 years," he said, the lightness in his tone attempting to ease the heaviness of the moment. "But only now do I see you in this state. I couldn't just walk away." Rachel's bruised face softened at his words, the faintest ghost of a smile touching her lips. "It's not a coincidence that you were a little late today, is it?" Marcus chuckled lightly, his heart swelling with a mixture of affection and admiration. "You noticed I was late?" Rachel nodded. "Of course I did. And I also noticed you were alone, without a partner." "Yeah," Marcus said, his voice reflecting a strange mix of wonder and disbelief. "This is the first time I've operated alone without a partner. Everything that happened today, it's hard not to think there was some greater purpose behind it all." Rachel's eyes softened, her gaze lingering on him. "I'd like to believe that too, that maybe someone was watching over us. All of us." Their conversation was cut short as a detective approached, holding out documents for them to sign. It was time to finalize their statements. As Rachel signed, she glanced back at Marcus, her eyes still wet with emotion. "When this is all over," she said, her voice quieter now, "when things calm down, I'd like to thank you properly. Maybe dinner." Marcus was taken aback for a moment, but quickly nodded, a shy smile forming on his lips. "I'd like that," he said. "And please, don't hesitate to call if you ever need anything," he added with a self-deprecating chuckle, "though I hope you never need my help again. It'd probably mean something went really wrong." Rachel laughed lightly, the sound like a breath of fresh air in the midst of the storm. It was a small moment of levity, but it was enough to remind them that even in the darkest times, human connection and hope still had their place. "No, Marcus," she said, her voice warm and firm. "We all need each other." As the officers excused them, thanking them for their cooperation, Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. His heart skipped a beat as he saw the name of his employer flash on the screen. Taking a deep breath, he answered the call, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts racing through his mind. "Hello, this is Marcus," he said, trying to sound composed. "Marcus, this is Sarah from HR," came the response. "We've been trying to reach you. Your truck's GPS shows you're off route, and we've received calls about missed pickups. What's going on?" Marcus explained the events of the morning in as much detail as he could. He was bracing himself for the worst. But to his surprise, Sarah's tone was understanding. "I see," she said after listening to his account. "That's quite a situation you found yourself in. Finish up at the police station, then complete as much of your route as you can. We'll need to discuss this further when you return to the depot." The weight on Marcus's shoulders lifted slightly. While he knew there would still be consequences for abandoning his route, at least his employer was not immediately punishing him. There was hope that his job could be salvaged. Once the formalities were over and the statements had been given, Marcus turned to leave. But before he could step away, Lucy appeared, her eyes lighting up when she saw him. "Marcus," she called, running over. "Are you leaving? Can we come with you in your truck?" Rachel followed close behind, her expression uncertain. "Oh, Lucy, I don't think." But Marcus, seeing the hopeful look on the young girl's face, found himself nodding before he even realized it. "If it's all right with your mom, I don't see why not. It might be cramped and smelly, but..." He grinned, knowing exactly what was coming. Elena, who had been quietly observing, chimed in with a teasing smile. "Well, we can always shower later. And when will you get another chance to ride in a garbage truck?" Rachel hesitated for a moment, then relented. "All right, if Marcus doesn't mind, it would be nice not to have to call a cab." And so, in an unexpected turn of events, Marcus found himself driving a garbage truck with Rachel, Lucy, and Elena in tow. As they pulled out of the police station parking lot, Marcus marveled at how drastically the day had shifted. What started with a late pickup had turned into something far more meaningful. The ride back to their neighborhood was filled with a mixture of emotions. Lucy's excitement brought moments of lightness as she peppered Marcus with questions about the truck's operations. Rachel's quiet gratitude filled the space with a sense of peace, and Elena's supportive presence reminded Marcus of the strength that family could provide, even in the face of such turmoil. As they neared the street where Rachel and Lucy lived, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of completion, as if the events of the day had come full circle. He had started the day running late, but now he was returning to the same neighborhood, under completely different circumstances. When they reached their home, now bathed in the warm light of the afternoon, Marcus helped them out of the truck. Lucy turned and hugged him tightly, her gesture a pure expression of gratitude that touched him deeply. Rachel, her arm around Lucy's shoulders, looked at Marcus with a mixture of respect and something more. "Thank you, Marcus," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion, "for everything. You truly have the purest heart, serving the community in more ways than one." Marcus stood there for a moment, watching as they entered their home, Elena following close behind. He felt a profound sense of satisfaction, as if the simple act of doing his job had taken on a deeper meaning. It wasn't just about picking up trash. It was about serving the community, about making a difference in people's lives. Climbing back into his truck, Marcus took a moment to reflect. The day had been a whirlwind, filled with challenges and unexpected twists. He knew there would be more hurdles ahead. Explanations to his employers, potential legal proceedings as a witness, and the fallout from Dennis's threats. But as he started the engine and prepared to resume his route, Marcus felt a sense of peace. Whatever came next, he had made a difference today, and that knowledge would carry him through the challenges ahead. With a deep breath and a determined set to his shoulders, Marcus put the truck in gear and set off, ready to complete the rest of his route. The day wasn't over, but he faced it with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing he had done the right thing, and that for him was all that mattered.